Here we're going to take a look at analyzing transactions using the transaction sheets, and this is the second part of a three-part video system. And first of all, you have to have reviewed the previous PowerPoint shows, the previous videos on analyzing transactions. You also need to have your 4 copies of Analyzing Transactions Part 1 from shared files. And you need to have Amanda's Campus Delivery transactions, which are an Excel file on shared files. And you're going to work along with this. In the first part of this video, we had looked at the first 4 transactions of Amanda's Campus Delivery. And now we're going to go forward from that and take a look at the rest of the transactions for the rest of the month for her. To review, this was the chart of accounts that we had used in that first part. We had looked at some of the assets, and we had seen that there was, which are the things that the company owns. We had looked at the liabilities, which are the things that the company owes out. We only have one liability account, accounts payable, which is when we owe out to a vendor. And we had looked at owner's equity accounts. We have 2 of those, the capital and the drawing account. Now we're going to take a look at the third question a little bit closer. The first 2 questions, what happened and which account, we're still going to use those the same. But now when we get down to the third question, we have some owner equity accounts, and when we take a look at increases and decreases, we're going to have some owner equity accounts that increase equity and some owner equity accounts that decrease equity. And so we have to look at, are they not increasing the account, but are they increasing equity when we go to answer that question? There are 2 groups that can affect equity. The owners themselves, which we have looked at. If the owner invests money in the business, it's giving cash to the business is receiving cash, that's going to increase owner's equity. Owners can also take money away from the business can give up cash, and that's an owner withdrawal. But of course, if you started a business, you don't want the only way that the equity is going to go up or down is because you put in or you take out. You start the business because you want the business itself to increase your equity. And so here is what we're going to take a look at this time, at the business itself affecting equity and what accounts are involved with that. So here again shows us that equity is affected by these 2 groups, the owners and the business itself. And we already know that if the owners invest money, that's going to increase equity. The owners withdraw money out, that's going to decrease equity. But now we're going to take a look at the business. How does the business affect equity? So the business can have revenue. Revenue means we're selling things. We're selling our services or we're selling products. And whenever we sell our service or products, that is going to increase the company's revenue, the company's equity. So whenever we sell stuff, we are going to use an account from the chart of accounts that's called a revenue type of account. And so the key word that we're going to look for to use in the what happened section is sell or sold. With expenses of the business are going to decrease equity. And expenses happen when we use things. If we use office space, that would be rent expense. If we use employees, that's wages expense. If we use the lights in the store, that's utilities expense. Okay, and so when we use things, then we have expenses. And those expenses are on the chart of accounts as expenses, and they are going to decrease equity. So the owner can increase equity by investments. The business can increase equity through revenues. The owners can decrease equity through taking money out, withdrawals, or the business can decrease equity through expenses, using things. So of course, we hope that equity over time is increased, because it's a lot of work. If you start your own business, it's a lot of work, and you want the business to increase equity for yourself. And so you're hoping to have mostly the business increase that equity through revenues being more than expenses. If our expenses are more than our revenues, it's going to mean that our equity is going to go down for that period. We want our revenues to be more than our expenses so that the equity will go up for that particular period. Now, we're going to have some extra accounts on the chart of accounts. And these are going to be revenue and expense accounts. And these are listed after, they're technically part of owner equity, but they're going to be listed after those capital and drawing accounts. We're going to have a revenue section of any accounts related to selling our product or service. And then we'll have the expense accounts for the things that we use. So Amanda has delivery fees is her revenue account. She makes deliveries. And do not concern yourself with the fact that it has the fees word. We think of parking fees and library fees as fees being more like an expense as opposed to a revenue. But in the world of accounting, delivery fees would be a revenue account. It's when we sell stuff. So she's selling deliveries, so she's going to use delivery fees. If we have a business that mows lawns, we would use mowing fees. If we had a consulting business, we would have consulting fees. The expenses that we're going to add to Amanda is wages expense, rent expense, and telephone expense. And do not be concerned that this says Jessica Jane. Okay, that is just an old name that was used for Amanda's campus delivery. It's still the same project. Okay, so let's take a look at transaction E for the campus delivery. And here we sold some of our delivery services, and the customers gave us cash on the same day that we did the delivery services. And so the business is receiving cash, and what they're giving up is that Amanda had to go around and do a bunch of services, and so she had to sweat, she had to work and put a bunch of time in. Okay, that's what the company is giving up, the fact that we had to perform these services. But of course, we like to use our keywords. So we're going to use, instead of saying perform the services is what we give up, we're going to use our keyword that we sold services is what we gave up. Which accounts are we going to use? We're going to go back to our chart of accounts, and under cash, we have an account called cash. That's an asset. The business owns the cash. which is in our checking account. Then for the give up, we're looking for something where we sold services. And our keyword sold says this is going to be in the revenue section. And so if you look in the revenue section of Amanda's chart of accounts, you will see that there's only one revenue account there, delivery fees. And it is a revenue account, so we put an R and a circle around it. Now we go to question 3. How is the equation affected? And here's where we have to say increase or decrease. Okay, so we go back to the top to the what happened. Does the business have more or less cash than we did 5 minutes ago? We have more cash than we did 5 minutes ago. Did the business sell more services than it did 5 minutes ago? Yes, it did. It sold more services. So I'm going to put a plus next to cash and a plus next to delivery fees. Now, because I'm involving an owner's equity account, which is capital, drawing, revenue accounts, and expense accounts, if I'm involving any of those kind of accounts, I need to now ask one last step. How is it affecting equity? Because that's what I'm going to put down on my little equation for my pluses and minuses. Okay? Now, we had an increase in revenue. How does revenue affect equity? Well, we learned from the previous slide that revenue increases equity. So I am going to put a plus under equity. I don't care if what I have up under which account is a plus or a minus. If it increases equity, I'm going to put a plus under my A equals L plus E for equity. Then I also had a plus for assets, for the cash, and now I have plus equals plus, so my equation balances. Let's take a look at transaction F. Here is where we rented some office space. So what did we give up? We gave up cash, and what did we receive? We do not own the office space. If we don't pay our rent the first of next month, we're going to get kicked out. What you get in return for rent is the use of that space. I've now paid money and I can use this space for this month. Okay, so that's what we're receiving, use of the space. We do not own the space. Which accounts are we going to use? For cash, of course, we'll use cash, which is an asset. What about use of space? Well, here again, I've used my key word, use. Okay, and so I'm going to go to my chart of accounts. Whenever I use something, that's an expense account. So I'm going to look under my expenses, and I'm going to see an expense account called rent expense. Okay, so I'm going to put that under my receive for which accounts, and that's an expense account, so I use an E. Okay, now I go to question 3, and my increases or decreases. So I go back up to what happened. Do we have more or less cash than we did 5 minutes ago? Well, we paid cash out, so we have less cash than we did 5 minutes ago. Do we have more or less use of the space than we did 5 minutes ago? Well, 5 minutes ago I didn't have any use of office space, and now I do have use of office space. So I have more use of office space. So I'm going to put a plus next to rent expense and a minus next to cash. Now, because rent expense is one of those equity accounts, I have to now ask myself, how does expenses affect equity? Expenses decrease equity. So I'm going to put a minus under the equity, even though I have a plus under next to rent expense. I'm going to put a minus under equity because expenses decrease equity. Now I have a minus under A, and I have minus equal minus, and my equation balance. Now if you forgot to do that last little trick there, you would have a minus under asset and a plus under equity, from the rent expense, then you would have minus equals plus, and minus never equals plus. And so you would know that you had made a mistake. Usually your cash part is the easy part, so that you can just quick double check that. Did you have that right? And so you would know that your mistake is in the rent expense, and then hopefully that would trigger you to think, oh yes, I'm supposed to ask myself, how does expenses affect equity? That decreases equity. I have to make this into a minus. Okay, transaction G is where we paid for a telephone service. And so here again, we gave up cash, and in return, we get to use the telephone service. If you pay for Verizon or AT&T or whatever, you don't own those. You only get to use that telephone service. You may own the phone itself, but you don't own the service. You just get to use the service, and if you stop paying, you stop getting to use the telephone service. So we're giving up cash and receiving use of the telephone service. Which accounts are we going to use? For cash, again, we'll use cash, which is an asset. For use of telephone service, I've used my key word of use, so I know that that means it's going to be an expense account. I go to the chart of accounts, I look up under the expense accounts, and I see there's one called telephone expense. So I write that down under the receive, telephone expense, and that's an E for expense. Now I ask my increases or decrease. Do we have more or less cash than we did 5 minutes ago? We have less. Do we have more or less use of the telephone service? We have more. So I have a minus under cash and a plus next to telephone expense. But because telephone expense deals with being an equity account, I have to ask myself one last thing, which is how do expenses affect equity? Expenses decrease equity, so I have to change that to a minus when I put it under my accounting equation. And my minus under my asset, I have minus equals minus, and my equation balances. Transaction H. Here is where we Amanda ran around and sold some services, and the customers owe us. The customers did not give us cash today. This what happened question, remember, is always asking us what happened today. Today, the customers did not give us cash. They will give us cash in the future, but today they owe us. Okay? And so what we gave up is we performed the services, we sweated, okay, and we're good, but we want to use our keyword, so we're going to say sold services. What did we receive? The fact that customers owe us money. We own that money, but it's just in their pocket right now instead of ours. Which accounts are we going to use? For sold services, the keyword sold tells me that's going to be a revenue account. I go to the chart of accounts, I look under revenue accounts, there's only one, delivery fees, that's a revenue. Okay, for the receive, customers owe us, it's our money, we own that money, so that tells me it's going to be an asset. Okay, and I go there and I see an account called accounts receivable. Means I'm going to receive the money in the future. Okay, and this is how you tell accounts receivable from accounts payable. If I'm going to have to pay the money in the future to a vendor, that would be accounts payable. That means that today I owe out to the vendor, and that would be a liability. If customers owe us today, that's an asset. It's our money. We own that money. We're going to receive it in the future, and so I use accounts receivable, which is an asset. Now I go to increase or decrease. We sold more services than we did 5 minutes ago, so there's a plus with the delivery fees. And customers owe us more than they did 5 minutes ago, So there's a plus under accounts receivable. Delivery fees is an equity-related account, so I have to ask myself that one last thing. How do revenues affect equity? Revenues increase equity, so I'm going to keep the plus under equity, and I already have a plus under assets. So plus equals plus, and my equation balances. Here's transaction I, and we have we paid out cash and we received supplies. Which accounts are we going to use? We're going to use cash for cash, and that's an asset. And for supplies, we have an account called supplies, and that's an asset as well. We own the supplies. Do we have more or less cash than we did 5 minutes ago? We have less. Do we have more or less supplies than we had 5 minutes ago? We have more supplies. So I have a plus next to supplies and a minus next to cash. Neither one of these are equity accounts, so I don't have to worry about anything else. I have a plus under assets and I have a minus under assets. And when I have a plus and a minus, it doesn't even matter what the number is. They're going to wash each other out to zero. And I have nothing on the other side of the equation, so that side is 0, and I have 0 equals 0. Here we purchased an insurance policy for future use. Right now, today, we gave up cash, and we now own this insurance policy. Which accounts am I going to use? Well, cash we'll use for cash, which is an asset. For insurance policy, we're going to use an asset called prepaid insurance because we have paid for this insurance policy. We own today this insurance policy. I could turn around and take it back and get my money back. Okay? Increases and decreases. I go back up to the top. Do we have more or less cash than we did 5 minutes ago? We have less. Do we have more or less insurance policy? 5 minutes ago I didn't have any insurance policy. Now I have one. I have more. Once again, I don't have any equity accounts involved, so I just go right down to my equation and put my pluses and minuses. I have a plus under assets and a minus under assets, which washes out to 0. The other side of the equation has nothing, so it's 0, and our equation balances. Here is where some of the customers gave us some of the money that they owed us. So here today, the business is receiving cash. What are they giving up? The fact that the customers owe us less than they did 5 minutes ago. So in other words, we used to have a lot of money that the customers owed us that was in the customer's pocket and no money in our pocket. Now the customer has given us some money, so now there's more money in our pocket but less money in the customer pocket. So that's what we're giving up, the fact that we now have less money in the customer's pocket. The customer owes us less. Which accounts are we going to use? Customer owes us, again, means whatever the customer does owe us, we're going to receive in the future. And whatever the customer owes us, we actually own that money even though it's in their pocket. Okay, so that is an asset. And we're going to use accounts receivable. For cash, of course, we'll use cash, which is an asset. For our increases and decreases, the customer owes us less than they did 5 minutes ago, and we have more cash than we did 5 minutes ago. We're going to have a plus next to cash and a minus next to accounts receivable. Again, this doesn't involve any equity accounts. I have a plus and a minus under assets, so 0 equals 0. Okay, transaction L. Here is what we call a compound entry, or what I might call a 3-parter. We have 3 different parts to this. still the value of what is being given up is equal to the value of what is being received. It just involves more than just one thing that's being given up or one thing that's being received. In this particular case, we're receiving one thing, but we're giving up two things. The two things equal the value of the one thing that we're receiving. Okay? So here I have to put both things that I'm giving up. I'm giving up some cash, and I'm also giving up the fact that I owe out to the vendor some amount. I'm receiving one thing, which is a motor scooter. Now when I go down to which accounts, I have to have an account for each of those three things. So the account that I'm going to use for cash is cash, that's an asset. The account that I'm going to use for owe out to vendor is, owe out is a key word for liabilities. I look at my liabilities, there's only one, and that's accounts payable. I'm going to have to pay it in the future. So accounts payable is a liability. Those are my two give up accounts. For my receive, I received a motor scooter, and I own the motor scooter, even though I haven't fully paid for it yet. And I look under assets, and there's an account called delivery equipment, which is an asset. Now I go to my increases or decreases. Okay, do we have more or less cash than we did 5 minutes ago? We have less. Do we owe out more or less to the vendor than we did 5 minutes ago? Well, we owe out more to the vendor than we did 5 minutes ago. Do we have more or less motor scooter than we did 5 minutes ago? 5 minutes ago we had 2 motor scooters, now we have a third motor scooter. So we have more. But now when I go to put these pluses and minuses down in my accounting equation, I have a plus and a minus under assets, which we said before washes out to 0, and I have a plus under liability. So now I have 0 equals plus. Well, 0 does not equal plus. My accounting equation appears not to balance. So whenever we have one of these three-parters, we have to do something a little bit different. We have to actually put the numbers of these things on here, and then we have to make a little table, okay, and then we can see if the accounting equation balances. So up under which accounts, I'm going to put the numbers of how much cash did we spend. We spent $300. How much accounts payable? How much do we owe out to the vendor? $1,200. How much is the motor scooter? $1,500. Okay, so now I have a minus 300 under cash and a plus 1,200 under accounts payable and a plus 1,500 under delivery equipment. Now when I put the plus 1,500 and the minus 300 under assets, the plus 1,500 minus the 300 equals a plus of 1,200 for assets. And I have a plus of 1,200 under liabilities. Now my equation balances, but I had to put the numbers up there before I could. So you're going to have to do that whenever there's a three-parter compound equation. You're going to have to put the numbers. Okay, here we have transaction M. And here we had employees, and we paid wages to the employees. Now, when we say what happened, we gave up cash. What did we receive? We received the use of the employees. We do not own the employees. If we don't pay the employees, they will walk off the job. Okay? So we get to use the employees if we pay them cash. Okay? So which accounts are we going to use? For cash, we'll use cash, which is an asset. For use of employees, we used our keyword use. We go to our chart of accounts, and we have expenses are when we use things. We look under the expenses and we see there's one called wages expense. That's an expense. Now I look at increases, decreases. I go back to the top. Do we have more or less cash than we did 5 minutes ago? We have less cash than we did 5 minutes ago. Do we have more or less use of the employees? We have more use of the employees than we did 5 minutes ago. So I have a minus next to cash and a plus next to wages expense. Now expense accounts are part of equity, so I have to do that next little step where I have to say, how does expenses affect equity? Expenses decrease equity, so I have to put a minus under equity in my accounting equation and a minus under assets. So I have a minus equals minus, so my accounting equation balances. In transaction N, here is another three-parter, another compound entry. And so here, this time we're receiving two things and giving up one thing. But the value of the two things that we received still equals the value of the one thing that we're giving up. So what are we receiving? The business is receiving some cash. The business is receiving some customers owe us. What is the business giving up? It's sweating, it's performing services. We're going to use our keyword, sold services. Okay? What accounts are we going to use for sold services? Keyword says it's going to be a revenue account. We look, we see there's only one revenue account, delivery fees, that's a revenue. For cash, we're going to use cash, which is an asset. For customers owe us, remember, that means that we own the money. It just happens to be in their pocket. We will receive the money in the future. Eyes of the business. Is the business going to receive or pay the money? The business is going to receive the money in the future. So we're going to look under assets because we own the money, even though it's not in our pocket. And we see an account called accounts receivable, which is an asset. Now we learned in the other transaction, the other three-parter transaction, that we need to put the numbers down whenever we have a three-parter. So how much services did we sell? $1,050 worth of services. How much cash did we receive? $430. How much do customers owe us? $620. Okay, and our increases and decreases. We sold more services than we did 5 minutes ago. We have more cash than we did 5 minutes ago, and customers owe us more than they did 5 minutes ago. Okay, so we have pluses on all those things. So now I'm going to put it down in my equation, but I'm going to use the numbers as well as my pluses and minuses. So I have a plus 620 for accounts receivable, which is an asset, and I have a plus 430, which is an asset of cash. I add those two pluses together, and I get a plus of 1050 under assets. Then my revenues is a plus 1050. But remember, revenues is equity. I have to ask myself, how do revenues affect equity? Revenues increase equity, so I'm keeping that a plus. And that is plus 1050. And I have plus 1050 equals plus 1050, so my accounting equation balances. Here is transaction O, which is an owner withdrawal. And so here, the owner took money from the business. The business, from the eyes of the business, we don't care about the owner. From the eyes of the business gave up cash. The owner received cash, but we don't care about the owner. We care about the business. The business gave up cash. So we get the cash. This is just like owner investments. We put the cash in the right place first, and then whatever is left over, we put either owner investment or owner withdrawal, whichever it happens to be. So here we got the cash in the give up, and then we have the receive open, so that's where we're going to put owner withdrawal. What accounts are we going to use? For cash, we'll use cash, which is an asset. For owner withdrawal, we look under the owner equity accounts. We have capital and withdrawing. And that should be AA drawing. And now, because our owner equity accounts, we have 4 different types. We have owner investment, owner withdrawals, revenues, and expenses. And so now I can't just use OE like I did in part 1 of the video. I have to now use I for investment, W for withdrawal, R for revenues, and E for expenses. Okay, so here this is a withdrawal, so I'm going to use W. Now cash, now I look up increases and decreases. Do we have more or less cash than we did 5 minutes ago? Well, the business paid out cash, so it has less cash than it did 5 minutes ago. Do we have more or less owner withdrawal than we did 5 minutes ago? 5 minutes ago we had no owner withdrawal, and now we have an owner withdrawal, so we have more owner withdrawal than we did 5 minutes ago. So I have a plus next to AA comma drawing, and I have a minus next to cash. Now withdrawals, owner withdrawals is an equity account. So I have to tweak myself and say, how do withdrawals affect equity? Withdrawals decrease equity, so I have to put a minus under the equity. Now I have a minus under assets and a minus under equity, and my accounting equation balances.